Hello, welcome back. It's Karen here, Soul Symbols Astrology. You're really welcome here. So, this week for the astrology, I want to spend some time with the conjunction of Mars and Neptune in Aries because this feels like a really important moment in a much larger shift. Neptune has now entered Aries and Mars is coming to meet it in its temple. So Aries belongs to Mars and Pisces belongs to Jupiter. So although I'm including Neptune here archetypally, I'm not treating Neptune as a ruler. I'm looking at what happens when this transpersonal, visionary, dissolving force of Neptune enters the temple of Mars and Mars comes to meet it there. And Mars is not entering an empty space in his temple. Saturn, Venus, and the Sun have already crossed this early Aries ground, and Mercury will follow soon after. And then there'll be that Aries New Moon forming straight after that. So by the time Mars arrives, this part of Aries is already charged, and it will be further charged by the Mercury and the new moon. So there's already a sense that something has been stirred, seeded, and activated here. So I'm just going to get the charts up here and give you a look. 1 second. So here is the chart. We see Neptune here at 29 degrees of Pisces. That's on the 26th of January. And then on the 27th, we have Neptune moving into Aries. Then after this, we'll have Saturn appear and perfect his conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries with Neptune. Then after this, we will see Venus. And Venus comes in and she's conjuncted with both Pisces and then Saturn. And then we'll see the Sun come in. Mars perfects. We see Mars perfecting the conjunction at 2 degrees of Aries on the 13th of April. Mercury will then follow. Oops. Here we have Mercury doing that conjunction, and you'll see this full moon. At full moon, you'll see this new moon at 27 degrees of Aries. So that is stacked, all those planets, huge stellium there, happening there. So let's get this back to the Mars conjunction. And I can show you what is important. So what we're looking at here in the chart is a gathering of archetypal pressure in that temple of Mars. Mars is arriving into a field that's already been activated and is continuing to build here. So if we look more closely at the perfection of this conjunction of Neptune and Mars, it happens at 2 degrees of Aries. And that is in the bounds of Jupiter. You can see here that's Jupiter's bounds, but it's also in the face of Mars, a decan of Mars. So it gives a conjunction of very direct martial quality. It emphasizes action, courage, force, initiative, and the urge to move. But the bounds of Jupiter here bring another layer. They bring questions of meaning, belief, purpose, righteousness, faith, and that sense that action is being taken in the service of something larger. So right from the start, there's something very revealing here. It's not only that warrior Mars meeting the mystic Neptune, it's also action being infused with belief and meaning and mission. At its best, that can be inspired action, courage in service of a wider vision, or the willingness to move in alignment with something genuinely life-giving. but in the shadow form, and all planetary archetypes carry their shadow, it can become moral inflation, zeal, or that conviction that your action is justified by a higher cause. So even at the level of the bounds and face, you can already see both the potential and the danger in this conjunction. Let me get you back. There you are. That's it. Let's get rid of that. So with that in mind, those things in mind, let us have a look at Mars and Neptune together in Aries. So Mars is the warrior. So Mars is, he acts, he pushes, he initiates, he cuts through and moves forward what it wants to move forward, basically. So Mars is heat and urgency, desire, courage, force, struggle, and action. They're the kind of archetypal signatures of Mars. And in Aries, Mars is in his own temple. So he's strong here. He's direct. Yeah. Aries is cardinal fire. It's the beginning of spring. So it's a sign of emergence and ignition. So you can have the image of the strike of a match. It's life force moving forward here. So Mars in Aries has a real clarity of intent. He's not wanting to wait around. He wants movement, traction, and that new beginning. And at best, Mars in Aries will give us courage and conviction. It will bring initiative and the willingness to act. At his worst, Mars can become rash, forceful, self-willed, aggressive, or swept up in a need to conquer. So not very good shadows there. Neptune's very different. It's almost a paradox, is Mars and Neptune. So archetypally, Neptune is speaking to vision and longing. We're thinking here of imagination, diffusion, dissolution, idealism, sacrifice, compassion, and that spiritual yearning, the pull towards something beyond the ego, beyond the ordinary self. But Neptune has also got a shadow. It can blur things. It's seductive. It's quite a seductive energy, and it can confuse. So it can confuse our motive and produce glamour, illusion, fantasy, and a drifting away from what is real and embodied. So with Neptune here, we can get a sense of futility sometimes and a passivity with it. But when Mars and Neptune come together, we're looking at the meeting of the warrior Mars and the mystic Neptune. So we're looking at action and vision, force and surrender. And we're looking at passion, diffusion, compassion, and we can have courage and confusion here. So from 2013-ish to 2024, Neptune was in Pisces and Mars had conjunction with it every 2 years here, first being in 2013. So Pisces is the domicile of Jupiter. So these conjunctions took place in a more mutable water sign, in a much more fluid and permeable environment. Now Neptune has gone to Aries, and that changes the atmosphere a huge amount. We've got the water of Pisces and the fire of Aries here. So that imaginal and transpersonal force symbolized by Neptune isn't moving through that water, but through cardinal fire. And that means it becomes more active, more immediate, and more incendiary. And this is the first time in our lifetimes that Mars has met Neptune in Aries. Neptune was last in Aries in the 19th century, and before that it was the late 17th and early 18th centuries. And it's a 165-year cycle. These periods were marked by major political and cultural shifts, by conquest, expansion, alliance making, ideological struggle, and scientific change. But I wouldn't want to reduce our history into a single transit. But I do think Neptune in Aries describes periods in which vision, belief, collective fantasy become active forces that shape the world. They don't remain inward or contemplative. They seek expression and movement and embodiment. So, what does Mars conjunct Neptune look like? Well, at its highest, it can be inspired action. So it can be courage in service of something greater than our egos or ourselves. It can be that energy to move on a vision, to create and protect, to intervene, or to take action on behalf of whatever you're feeling called to serve. So this can be spiritual and creative vitality. It can be compassionate action. It can be the willingness to act not simply, just from anger, angry action or self-interest, but from that deeper sense of purpose. Neptune can give Mars a vision, and Mars can give Neptune the means to act on it. So it's beautiful in that respect. And this is one of the best expressions of this conjunction. It can bring that kind of courage that's moved by conscience. It can help us to take a vision seriously enough to do something with it. And it can make imagination practical and compassion active. So it's not just a soft transit, and that's really important. This shadow side of Mars and Neptune is very real, particularly in Aries. Mars can act before it sees clearly. Neptune can make us think we're seeing clearly when in fact we're caught in projection, fantasy, or some sort of emotional intoxication. So the pairing can produce confused action, misplaced zeal. It can glamorize conflict. That's not good. It can bring self-deception, hidden motives, and that sense of being carried along by something that feels compelling, but it's not actually grounded in the real world. And at the collective level, this can get even darker, quite frankly. Mars with Neptune can show the delusional warrior or the spiritualized aggressor. So the one who believes the cause is sacred and so places himself beyond all ordinary human restraint. And this is where violence can get wrapped in myth and conquest, justified as destiny, or where that force is disguised as holier than thou righteousness, and where entire groups of people are reduced to abstractions. They're dehumanized as threats or obstacles. And history has shown us this many times. It's one of the worst expressions of the shadow of Mars and Neptune together. And unfortunately, we don't need to look far in our own world to see this operating now. We're living through a time where violence is clothed in that language of purity, destiny, security, chosenness, or moral necessity. And it's one of the dangers of Neptune when it works through Mars in a sign like Aries. It can drain away ordinary feeling and replace it with a story that justifies destruction and the destruction of human life as well. So for me, one of the central questions of this conjunction isn't simply what do I want to act on, but it's what is animating my action. What inside me is moving me, what kind of vision has, grabbed hold of me. And to look at the stories that we are serving or that we want to serve and understand whether we're acting out of clarity or out of grievance, fantasy, inflated purpose, or some need to feel powerful. So important here. And the other thing that becomes incredibly important with this transit is humility, proper humility. Because this Mars in Aries wants to move quickly. It wants that momentum and something to do. And then we've got Neptune here clouding the field and making us think that, emotional intensity is the same of truth. So it can make that urgency feel holy and sacred. It can make personal anger seem like some great calling, and it can make fantasy feel. So I think part of the work of this transit, if you want to work with it, is to slow down enough to hear the deeper motive reveal itself. So that's not becoming passive, but becoming honest. And we're not dampening down this fire, but we're finding out what the fire in our belly is actually serving. And this matters personally as well as collectively. We've seen what fire does, how destructive. It can be creative fire, it can be destructive. So many people will feel really stirred by this transit. They can be those surges of desire and energy, vision, or even that agitation. But there's often a sense, because it's Aries, of something wanting to begin. So there can be that restlessness, inspiration, frustration, or a renewed longing for purpose. It's that waiting for the sun to come back, for life to spring into action, that we get at the end of winter. We've got those energies about. But the answer isn't to grab the first available mission and run with it. The answer could be to listen more carefully to what's really trying to come through. And sometimes Neptune will remove certainty before it gives us vision. And you might feel direction dissolving. And that will be before a truer direction emerges. Sometimes what first appears is not the purpose itself, but it can be confusion, grief, disillusionment, or longing that has to be faced before purpose becomes clearer. And that is not a failure of the transit, it's part of its work. So where do we begin with this? For me, I'd begin by acknowledging that many of us don't always have a clear sense of purpose. I didn't for a large part of my life, and that forcing one can do more harm than good. That is the important thing. This conjunction can ask us to surrender some of our assumptions about what we think we're here to do, or how quickly the path should become clear. Mars wants direction, Neptune wants us to listen beyond our usual ideas of control. Okay, we don't always control our purpose and direction. So it doesn't mean sitting there doing nothing. It means allowing action to come from a deeper place within us. It means being willing to move when something real begins to emerge, rather than just acting to escape uncertainty. I mean, I'm caught in that right now, that urge to act, to have something solid, you know. Yeah, the higher expression of Mars and Neptune in Aries, it's not passivity, it's inspired movement. It's where our wills aligned to something larger, and having the courage informed by compassion. So it's action that doesn't need to harden itself into an ideology. And that can show up in really direct ways. It can be a decision to stand for something or someone vulnerable. It might come as a real new, fresh, creative impulse, or it can be the willingness to serve exactly where you are rather than waiting for a grand role to appear. It can also be the decision to stop feeding systems that dehumanize others. Do that in so many ways. And it can be the courage to act from integrity, even when the larger culture conditions us that the rewards come from noise, certainty, and spectacle. Yeah, that's the tough one. But that, to me, is where the antidote lies. It's not in rejecting Mars, because we need Mars. We need that courage, force, movement, the action. And it's not in rejecting Neptune either, because we need that sense of meaning, the vision, imagination, surrender, and really understand and have that sense that life is larger than our individual will. The work is to let these two principles come into right relationship, because Mars without Neptune can become hard, blunt, and destructive. And Neptune without Mars, on the other hand, can become really vague, passive, and ungrounded. And together at their best, they can bring vision into action and compassion into force. But that only happens if we're willing to tell the truth about shadow. So what do I mean about that? I mean about being honest, where our own anger becomes a kind of self-righteousness, and having the honesty about where fantasy is a substitute for action. And if you're highly creative, that can be a shadow. Because it's beautiful, isn't it, if you're creative, to stay with your images of your painting or whatever it is in your head and not actually put paint to canvas. Yeah. So we have to be honest where we're drawn to savior roles as well, and heroic self-images or stories of being specially chosen. I'm special for some reason or another. So there are ways that this conjunction can go off course here. And also, we have to be honest about the genuine longing underneath all that. Because beneath the distortion, there's often something real, a real desire for purpose or justice, a real longing for a more connected and compassionate way of living, and that longing to contribute something meaningful to the world, to life. And maybe our task is not rejecting that longing, and that shadow of that longing. It can come up as shadow before we realize what the longing actually is. Okay, that can be, that kind of blurring that Neptune brings. But yeah, maybe it's asking what's worth giving my energy to, looking at what action actually serves life. And ask what you're being, or we are being asked to protect or create or begin, and what needs to be surrendered so that that truer form of courage can emerge. So this conjunction also sits within that larger Aries build-up, as I showed you in the chart, and that really matters here because Mars is not acting alone. There's already pressure in this sign. There's already a concentration, and it feels like a sense of a field gathering force. Okay, almost like people lining up. The soldiers getting in formation on the battlefield. It's that kind of energy. So I think it's fair to say that Mars conjunct Neptune, it's not the whole story. I'm telling the story this week. It's an important part of a larger sequence. Something's being stirred now that has been and will continue to unfold. So for us, that means we don't need to force a final answer this week. The build up to the conjunction and the separation, 3-degree separation, will be 7 to 8 days. So it's a full week. But at the end of that, we don't have to have all those answers. We don't need to force it. We may have them. And we don't need to turn the first spark that we have into a finished doctrine and ideology, or to assume that the first impulse is the whole of the truth. So this can be approached as an opening, a beginning, a first contact between that fire of Aries and our vision. And I believe vision and fire are really interconnected metaphysically. So, and perhaps for us, that's the most useful way to hold the energies this week, those archetypes, to hold the paradoxes of it. So not demanding certainty, but more holding it as an invitation to become more conscious of what moves us. And get that discernment about the stories we're serving internally and externally, and allow the vision and action to meet without letting one or the other dominate. Hold them. Vision, action, action, vision. Yeah, to let the warrior be shaped by the mystic without getting lost in the fantasy of some fantastical journey or specialness in it, and to let that mystic be given the backbone by the warrior, but not to the extent of self-righteousness, sacred mission that's dehumanizing to others. Yeah, without becoming hardened into crusade energy, because we can all be affected by that, even if we're not going on a proper crusade. Okay. For me, Mars and Neptune, conjunct Neptune in Aries, is asking what happens when our vision catches fire. And sometimes that answer is dangerous because it becomes zeal, conquest, and projection. But sometimes it can be courage, compassion, and meaningful action. So much depends on whether we're prepared to face the shadow honestly and let that fire be used for something better. So, as Mars comes together with Neptune in Aries this week, I think the real question is not just what do I want or what am I inspired by? The deeper question is what's moving me and what is my action in service to? So this conjunction can bring energy, vision, and a sense of purpose, but it can also bring confusion, projection, and a false sense of mission. So the task is not to distinguish the fire, but to work with it consciously. So thank you for being here with me. I really appreciate it. And next time, next week, I'll be looking at the wider Aries build up and what this week is opening up into. So if this reflection resonated, share in the comments how this transit is speaking to you. And obviously, like, subscribe, and book a reading if you want to. And I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.